At 6:15 on the gray and rain-lashed morning of June 5, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stepped into the back seat of his staff car at Château La Rocheguyon, a fortress carved into the cliffs above the Seine, 40 miles northwest of Paris, unaware that the next 36 hours would bring about the moment he had predicted, feared, and tried desperately to prepare for. Beside him sat his aide-de-camp, Captain Helmuth Lang, while in Rommel's hands rested a small modest package wrapped in paper, a pair of gray suede shoes, size 5.5, purchased in Paris a week earlier as a birthday gift for his wife, Lucy, who would turn 50 the next day. He had not seen her in months, for Rommel had spent the past half-year driving himself without mercy, working 18-hour days, inspecting every bunker and emplacement along 800 miles of coastline, moving with relentless energy from strong point to strong point, sleeping little, eating when he remembered, possessed by a single conviction that the great blow would soon fall and that Germany had, at most, one chance to stop it. Outside the chateau, the weather matched his exhaustion. Wind howled across the Seine valley, rain pounded the windows, low clouds pressed like a lid upon the world. No invasion, Rommel believed, could possibly come in weather like this. His chief of staff, General Hans Speidel, who had hosted guests the night before and slept barely 3 hours, stood at the entrance of the chateau and bid the field marshal farewell. The atmosphere at headquarters was relaxed, even calm, because the German meteorologists had issued a confident forecast. Storms and rough seas would continue for 2 weeks, making an early June invasion impossible. The next tide and moon window would not come until late June. Therefore, Rommel allowed himself one brief moment of personal life, to drive home to Germany for Lucy's birthday and then continue to Berchtesgaden to argue one last time with Hitler for the release of the Panzer reserves. What he did not know was that the situation he had warned of for months, what he had declared with absolute clarity on the cold, wind-swept sands of Normandy on April 22, 1944, was now racing toward him with unstoppable force. That April morning, standing on an empty beach with Lang at his side, Rommel had pointed his marshal's baton at the surf and said with the blunt certainty of a man who understood modern war better than any of his superiors, "The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We will have one chance to stop the enemy, while he is in the water, struggling to come ashore. Reserves will never arrive in time. Everything must be here, at the water's edge." The wind tore at his greatcoat as he spoke, his face weathered, his expression grim. The first 24 hours will be decisive. The fate of Germany depends on their outcome. For the Allies and for Germany, it will be the longest day. Lang never forgot those words, and history would soon prove them prophetic, for Rommel alone grasped the brutal reality that once Allied troops established a beachhead, once their tanks rolled ashore and their artillery followed, once they connected their landing zones, Germany would never throw them back. But Rommel's conviction brought him into months of fierce conflict with Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the aging, aristocratic commander-in-chief in the West, a veteran of the First World War and the early blitzkrieg triumphs against Poland and France. Rundstedt believed in classic mobile defense: allow the Allies to land, identify their main point of attack, then unleash the panzer divisions in a massive armored counterstrike that would drive the enemy back into the sea. This doctrine had worked on the Eastern Front, where vast open spaces allowed tanks to maneuver freely. Rommel, however, had fought the Western Allies in North Africa. He had watched his convoys annihilated from the sky, his tanks shredded by fighter bombers, his movements exposed by total Allied air superiority. He knew that any armored force positioned far from the coast would be destroyed on the roads long before reaching the battlefield. Rundstedt, dismissive, considered Rommel a gifted tactician but a man promoted too quickly and too highly by Hitler. Rommel thought Rundstedt hopelessly outdated, blind to the new reality of air-dominated warfare. Their staffs clashed constantly. The command in France became paralyzed by conflicting doctrines, and because Hitler trusted neither man, the final decision over the armored reserves fell to him. Predictably, Hitler made a compromise that satisfied no one. He split the panzer divisions, some to Rommel near the coast, some to the Southern Army Group G, and 4 of the best, including the 12th SS Hitlerjugend and Panzer, into a central reserve under General Gehr von Schweppenberg. But in a final twist of catastrophic micromanagement, Hitler decreed that none of these reserve divisions were allowed to move without his personal authorization. Not Rundstedt's. Not Rommel's. Not Schweppenberg's. Only the Führer's. That meant that when the invasion finally came, the most powerful armored formations in France would sit motionless until Hitler, sleeping, traveling, lecturing, or eating, chose to release them. Rommel knew this was insanity and protested constantly, but Hitler refused to relinquish control. Thus, Rommel did what he could with the time and authority he had, and what he accomplished between November 1943 and June 1944 bordered on superhuman. When he first inspected the Atlantic Wall, he found it a hollow illusion, a propaganda creation more than a functional defense. Bunkers stood incomplete, gun positions exposed, beaches unmined, stretches of coast undefended, fields of fire poorly arranged. Something out of cloud cuckoo land, he called it. And then he set to work. Up before dawn, returning after dark, he drove his staff thousands of miles, inspecting every position personally. He demanded millions of mines, anti-personnel, anti-tank, electrically triggered, tripwired, remotely detonated. He wanted 50 million mines. He received 5 million, still more than the entire Eastern Front. He ordered 500,000 obstacles, Czech hedgehogs, Belgian gates, stakes tipped with mines, rails mounted with explosive charges, designed to tear the hulls off landing craft or kill soldiers in the surf. He flooded lowlands, planted sharpened stakes called Rommel's asparagus to kill paratroopers, reinforced bunkers, built thousands of new strongpoints, dug trenches, and interlocked machine gun fields of fire so that every beach would become a slaughter yard. But time was the enemy he could not beat. By June, only 3 rows of beach obstacles existed instead of 6. The Panzer divisions remained too far inland. And Rommel, exhausted, desperately missing his family, and convinced the weather made an invasion impossible, left for Germany on June 5. Meanwhile, the Allies possessed a crucial advantage Germany lacked: access to weather data from the North Atlantic. Their meteorologists detected a brief break in the storms, just enough for a dangerous but possible invasion. Eisenhower postponed 1 day, then convened his commanders at 4:15 a.m. on June 5 at Southwick House. Group Captain James Stagg delivered his verdict: June 6 would offer a narrow window. The seas rough, the skies cloudy, but acceptable. Eisenhower weighed the risk. Delay meant disaster for the fleet already at sea. Finally, he said quietly, "Okay, we'll go." While Rommel drove toward Germany, 5,000 ships churned across the Channel. While rain streaked his car windows, paratroopers prepared to jump. While he thought of handing Lucy a pair of gray suede shoes, the largest amphibious invasion in human history was underway. The first warning for the Germans came just after midnight on June 6, when American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Divisions dropped west of the beaches, scattered by wind and flak. Some drowned in flooded fields Rommel had ordered created. British gliders seized Pegasus Bridge in a flawless night assault. At La Roche-Guyon, Spy-Del received frantic, contradictory reports, dummy parachutists mixed with real ones, false alarms mixed with genuine threats. The deception plan, Operation Fortitude, had worked too well. Many German commanders remained convinced the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais under Patton's Phantom Army. Even a BBC broadcast of Verlaine's coded poem, long known to German intelligence as the signal for invasion, failed to produce action. The warning went to the wrong army. 7th Army in Normandy never fully mobilized. At Hitler's headquarters in the mountains of Bavaria, no one dared wake the Führer. He had stayed up late watching newsreels and discussing grand visions. Now, drugged by sleeping pills, he slumbered while the fate of Europe shifted. Rundstedt begged for Panzer release. Jodl hesitated, convinced Normandy might be a diversion. And still no one woke Hitler. At 6:30 a.m., the beaches erupted. At Utah, the Americans landed off course but into lighter defenses, a stroke of luck. At Omaha, they walked into hell, machine gun fire sweeping the surf, artillery exploding among the landing craft, the tide running red. Bradley considered evacuation, but small groups of soldiers clawed their way up the bluffs, silencing bunkers one by one. British and Canadian forces pushed inland from Gold, Juno, and Sword. Hours passed. Hitler slept. The Panzers remained still. At last, around 10 a.m., Hitler awoke. At 11:30 he was briefed. Even then, he refused to release the armored reserves, convinced Normandy was a feint. Only by mid-afternoon, 8 catastrophic hours too late, did he authorize 2 divisions to move. They were immediately attacked from the air, just as Rommel had warned. Panzer Lehr lost over 100 vehicles before reaching the front. Only the 21st Panzer Division, near Cannes, was close enough to strike meaningfully, but its commander was absent, authority unclear, orders contradictory. By the time it attacked, the British beachhead had solidified. The division briefly reached the sea, the only German tanks to touch the beaches on D-Day, before withdrawing under threat of encirclement from misinterpreted airborne formations. Meanwhile, Rommel raced back toward France by car, unable to fly due to Allied air dominance, listening helplessly to reports of disaster. By the time he reached La Roche-Guyon that evening, the Allied foothold was unshakable. His 24-hour window was gone. "How stupid of me," he muttered, a sentence he repeated over and over. In the following weeks, he fought grimly, trying to contain the inevitable, but the Allied buildup was unstoppable. By June 12, 326,000 troops and thousands of tons of supplies were ashore. Cannes fell only in mid-July after brutal fighting, but strategically it no longer mattered. On July 17, Rommel's staff car was strafed by a British Spitfire. He was gravely injured, skull fractures, shattered eye socket, and removed from command permanently. 3 days later, the July 20th plot attempted to kill Hitler. Though evidence against Rommel was ambiguous at best, tortured conspirators named him, and Hitler decided the Desert Fox must die. On October 14, 1944, 2 generals arrived at his home with cyanide and a choice: suicide and protection for his family, or a public trial and execution by hanging. Rommel told his 15-year-old son, Manfred, "To die at the hands of one's own people is hard. But the house is surrounded. Hitler charges me with treason." He said goodbye to Lucy, put on his Afrikakorps jacket, took his marshal's baton, and walked to the waiting car. 20 minutes later he was dead. Germany was told he died of wounds. He received a state funeral. The truth emerged only after the war. Today, the beaches of Normandy are quiet. The bunkers sit empty. The tides erase the footprints of tourists who walk where thousands fell. Row upon row of white crosses and stars of David stretch across the cemeteries, silent witnesses to a day whose outcome shaped the modern world. And the lesson remains: 24 hours. That was all the time Germany had. Rommel knew it. He said it plainly. And because no one listened, because Hitler slept, because no one dared act, because Rommel was 600 kilometers away holding a birthday gift instead of his command baton, the longest day became the beginning of the end. Some moments in history never return once lost. D-Day's first 24 hours were such a moment, and when they slipped away, the fate of the Third Reich slipped with them.